On Christmas morning, Emma thought she would have an ordinary day filled with the joy of doing a small act of kindness. However, the simple compassion she showed to a lonely elderly man she met at church would spark events that would change her life forever. Little did she know, that day she wasn't just altering his Christmas, but also her destiny. It was Christmas morning, and the streets of the town were silent. Trees blanketed in white snow, and the warm glow spilling from windows radiated a sense of peace unique to this time of year. As usual, Emma had risen early and was making her way to the church. Since childhood, she had made it a habit to say a prayer there on such days. Sitting on those old wooden pews, feeling the tranquility seep into her, helped her believe that everything was okay, if only for a little while. Emma's life in recent years had been fraught with challenges. She had been unjustly fired from her job and was forced to move into a tiny apartment due to financial struggles. Yet she never gave up. Clinging to the small joys in her life, she managed to persevere. Today, she had planned something special for herself. With the small amount of money she had saved, she intended to treat herself to a meal at her favorite restaurant that evening, a little reward for enduring it all. As she stepped into the church, the familiar sense of peace embraced her. She took a seat on one of the pews and closed her eyes. Softly, she whispered a heartfelt prayer. Please bring more kindness and peace to this world. Let people be more compassionate toward one another. After her prayer, she stood up and began to walk slowly toward the door. That's when she noticed an elderly man sitting in a corner of the church. She hadn't seen him at first glance. His shoulders were slumped, his head bowed low. Tears silently streamed down his cheeks. Emma froze for a moment, struck by the man's loneliness and sorrow. She hesitated, unsure of what to do, but the urge to help quickly won over, and she walked toward him. "Excuse me, are you okay?" she asked gently. The man lifted his head, his tear-filled eyes meeting Emma's in surprise. He quickly wiped his face, trying to hide the fact that he had been crying. "Oh yes, I'm fine," he said in a frail voice, though the sorrow etched on his face was unmistakable. Without a second thought, Emma sat down beside him. "Sometimes talking can lighten the burden," she said with a kind smile. "I'm here if you want to share." The man remained silent for a moment before taking a deep breath and speaking. "It's Christmas today. I came here to spend it with my family," he said, his voice trembling. "But they said they didn't want to see me. They shut the door in my face." Emma's heart ached. Watching his tears only deepened the compassion she felt. She decided to set aside her plans for her own little joys. She needed to do something to ease the old man's loneliness, even just a little. "Wait here," she said, rising to her feet. "I'll be right back." The man nodded quietly, his expression a mixture of confusion and resignation. As Emma stepped out of the church into the snowy street, she thought to herself, "Today, I have to create a Christmas miracle." As Emma stepped out of the church, the cold winter air hit her face. Snowflakes fell gently to the ground, but the urgency and compassion in her heart didn't allow her to pause. Her eyes quickly scanned the street for a nearby shop. She was in a rush, eager not to leave the elderly man alone for too long. A few steps ahead, she spotted a cafe on the corner. The warm glow from its windows and the gentle bustle inside made it seem like the perfect place. As she opened the door, a wave of warmth and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted her. The young barista behind the counter smiled and said, "Welcome." Emma returned the smile and replied quickly, "Hi, I'd like a cup of hot coffee and something to go with it. Maybe a dessert?" The barista handed her a menu, and Emma's eyes darted across it for the best options. "Could I get a slice of that apple pie?" she asked. After finalizing her choices, she opened her wallet to pay. The small amount of money she had reminded her of her struggles, but the image of the elderly man's lonely face and trembling voice erased any hesitation. As she handed over the money, she reminded herself, "This is the best gift you can give to someone." After collecting the coffee and pie, Emma headed for the exit, but noticed a stand of greeting cards near the door. The brightly colored Christmas cards caught her attention. One card in particular stood out. It read, "There is always hope." Feeling compelled, she picked it up and asked the barista for a pen. In the card, she wrote a few heartfelt lines. "You are not alone this Christmas. We all need a little support sometimes. Today I'm here for you. Merry Christmas." Placing the card in her bag, Emma began walking briskly back to the church. On the way, she imagined the elderly man's face. The deep sadness in his eyes had left a mark on her, and she was determined to bring him some hope, to let him know he wasn't alone. As she approached the church, she quickened her pace. The elderly man was still there, sitting on the bench with his head bowed. When Emma reached him, she gently cleared her throat and spoke kindly. "I brought you something," she said, holding out the coffee and pie. The man looked up, his eyes filled with surprise as he gazed at Emma. His eyes glistened with a mix of gratitude and emotion. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice trembling. "You've made me feel like someone truly cares." Emma sat down beside him and handed him the coffee. "We all need a little hope today," she said softly. She then handed him the card. As the elderly man opened it and read the words, tears began to stream down his cheeks once again. But this time, there was a glimmer of happiness mixed with the sadness. "The words on this card, they're so special," he said, looking at Emma with deep emotion. "It's like you can see into my heart." Emma smiled gently. "I believe we all have the power to make the world a little kinder. This is my small way of doing that," she said. The man clutched the coffee cup with both hands and whispered his thanks to Emma. In that moment, she felt the true meaning of Christmas once again. Witnessing how a simple act of kindness could make such a profound difference in someone's life was worth more than anything to her. Richard took a deep breath as he sipped his coffee beside Emma. His hands still trembled slightly, but he seemed to find a sense of peace in her presence. His gaze was fixed on the floor, as though weighed down by the gravity of his own thoughts. The silence between them lasted for a while, but to Emma, it wasn't uncomfortable. On the contrary, his very presence stirred something within her. A desire to help, an urge to spread kindness. "I haven't even asked your name," Emma said eventually, gently breaking the silence. "My name's Emma. What's yours?" The man lifted his head and studied Emma with his tired eyes. "Richard," he said, followed by a faint smile. "But my grandson used to call me Richie, once upon a time." "That's a beautiful name," Emma replied with a warm smile. "I'd love to spend more time with you so your Christmas doesn't feel so lonely. If you don't mind, of course." For a brief moment, Richard's eyes glistened with emotion. Her genuine offer clearly touched him, though he remained cautious. "I'm grateful you care," he said, "but I'm sure you have plans of your own. You shouldn't spend your time on someone like me." Emma shook her head firmly, her expression resolute. "My plans don't matter. What matters is that I want to be here with you. I believe spending time together will make both of us feel better." Richard took a deep breath and said, "Emma, meeting someone like you in this world is a rare blessing. But honestly, life can get to a point where even a helping hand feels hard to accept." His words tugged at Emma's heartstrings. The sadness in his voice hinted at wounds far deeper than she had imagined. "If spending time with me won't make you feel better," she said, her face lighting up with a warm smile, "why don't we at least give it a try? Let's go to my place. We can cook a simple meal together. I live alone too. Two lonely people together might just feel a little less lonely, don't you think?" Richard looked at her for a moment, his expression uncertain, but eventually he nodded. "All right," he said with a small smile. "If you insist, I can't say no to you." Emma reached out her hand to help him. Richard grasped it lightly and slowly rose to his feet. Her determined yet gentle demeanor seemed to reignite a spark within him. As they stepped out of the church together, snowflakes continued to drift softly to the ground. Walking toward her car, Emma turned to Richard and said, "I have a small apartment, but it's warm and cozy. We'll cook something simple together. I even have a little Christmas tree from a few years ago." A faint smile appeared on Richard's face. "This might just be the most meaningful Christmas I've had in years," he said quietly. After helping Richard into her car, Emma began to drive. Soft music played in the background as they chatted along the way. Richard told Emma about his younger days and his family. Slowly, he opened up about the strained relationship with his son and grandson, explaining how those bonds had unraveled over time. As Emma listened, she realized Richard wasn't just a sorrowful old man, but a soul marked by the weight of things he had lost. When they arrived at her apartment, Emma opened the door and invited Richard inside. His eyes filled with admiration as he took in her small but charming space. "This place says so much about you," he said. "It's warm, simple, and radiates a deep sense of peace." Emma smiled and replied, "It's just a tiny apartment, but it's the source of my happiness. I'll make us some hot soup, and we'll add something sweet on the side. Let's make this Christmas a good one." As Richard watched Emma's determination with quiet awe, he began to feel that this night might be a new beginning for him. And Emma, on her part, marveled at how a simple act of kindness had turned into such a profound connection. Richard stepped into Emma's small yet cozy apartment with a hint of hesitation. Emma, radiating warmth, did everything she could to make him feel at ease. "Make yourself at home," she said with a gentle smile. "I'll head to the kitchen and start preparing some soup." Richard settled into the armchair Emma had indicated. The soft glow of the Christmas lights flickering around the room and the simplicity of the small tree brought back memories of Christmases he'd spent with his own family. A wave of sadness washed over him, but Emma's kindness and warmth served as a comforting counterbalance to his sorrow. From the kitchen, Emma called out, "Richard, I'm going to make you some tomato soup. I'll whip up a few sandwiches to go with it. I hope you like it." As Richard watched her bustling about in the kitchen, his eyes fell on a small stack of envelopes on the table. One of them was open, and in bold red letters, it read, "Past due." He hesitated for a moment, but then leaned closer to get a better look. Electricity, water, even rent bills. It was clear Emma was struggling financially. The sight stirred a sense of guilt in Richard. Despite her difficult circumstances, she was using her limited resources to help him. Emma returned with 2 steaming bowls of soup and a small plate of sandwiches. "Here we go, simple but delicious," she said, carefully placing the plates on the table. Richard thanked her and pulled the bowl closer. Before taking a bite, he looked at Emma, his expression serious. "Emma, I've noticed something about you," he said. "You're a strong and generous person, but it's also clear that you're going through a tough time." Emma paused, her eyes locking with Richard's before she quickly looked away. "Everyone goes through hard times," she said, trying to muster a smile. "This is just temporary. I'll get through it." Richard knew he had to tread carefully to avoid wounding her pride, but the gratitude and admiration he felt made it impossible to remain silent. "Meeting you today wasn't a coincidence," he said. "It's not right for someone as strong as you to face life alone." Emma stayed quiet for a moment, taking a spoonful of her soup and letting its warmth soothe her. Finally, she broke the silence. "Life isn't always fair," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm doing my best. Helping people makes me feel better. If I was able to help you today, that's my Christmas miracle." Richard smiled warmly, deeply moved by her humility and generosity. At the same time, he felt a growing urge to do something to ensure this remarkable young woman received what she truly deserved. A plan began to take shape in his mind. "Emma, tonight has been a very special night for me," Richard said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You reminded me of what Christmas truly means, but there's something I need to tell you. I'm not exactly who I seem to be." Emma set her spoon down, looking at him with surprise. "What do you mean?" Richard took a deep breath. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I became distant from my family and made poor choices, but I've lived with that regret for years. Meeting you today has given me a second chance, and now I want to give back some of the hope you've given me." Emma saw the determination in Richard's eyes, but still couldn't fully grasp what he was trying to say. Her curiosity was piqued, yet she also sensed the depth of the pain he carried. Whatever the truth behind his words, one thing was certain. They had brought solace to one another tonight. For now, that was enough. As the first light of morning crept into Emma's small apartment, the weight of last night's events still lingered in the air. Sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, Emma replayed Richard's words in her mind. "You gave me hope." She still couldn't fully grasp the meaning behind those words. A sudden knock at the door startled her. She quickly stood and walked over to answer it. Outside stood Richard, alongside a sharply dressed man who looked like a lawyer. Richard's expression was serious but kind. "Good morning, Emma," he said, extending an envelope toward her. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but there's something I need to explain." Emma stared at the envelope in confusion. "What's this?" she asked, looking from Richard to the lawyer. "May we come in?" Richard asked politely. After a brief hesitation, Emma opened the door wider and invited them inside. Once they were seated in her modest living room, Richard turned to her, taking a deep breath. "Emma, last night I told you I wanted to help you," he began, his voice calm yet resolute. "But this help might be far greater than you imagined." Emma was stunned. She carefully opened the envelope and gasped when she saw its contents. Inside was a large sum of money, some documents, and a few official-looking papers. She looked back at Richard, her voice trembling. "What does this mean?" Richard paused for a moment before speaking, his tone gentle yet earnest. "Emma, I'm not just a lonely old man," he said with a faint smile. "Years ago, I built a successful law firm from the ground up. I worked tirelessly my whole life, but in doing so, I distanced myself from my family. If I'm sitting in this loneliness today, it's because of my own choices." Emma listened intently as he continued. "But last night, your kindness changed everything. What you did, without expecting anything in return, reminded me of the power of humanity. And that's why I've decided to help you." Still trying to process what was happening, Emma shook her head slightly. "But this is too much. I only gave you a cup of coffee and a small Christmas gesture. You don't have to do this." Richard smiled and shook his head. "It wasn't just coffee, Emma. It was an act that made me feel human again. Everything I've achieved in life has been tied to my success. But yesterday, you showed me there's more to life than that. That's why I've tasked the best lawyers at my firm with addressing your situation." Emma's eyes widened in disbelief as she picked up one of the documents. It detailed a legal case being pursued against her former employer, with the assurance that she would receive more than what she was owed. Additionally, Richard had planned to provide her with financial support. Her eyes filled with tears. "But why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do all this for me?" Richard's gaze softened as he smiled. "Because helping one person heal is the first step to healing the world. You helped me, Emma. Now, I want to give that kindness back to you." Emma struggled to find the words. "Richard, this is too much, but," she said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Thank you." Richard's smile grew warmer. "This is the spirit of Christmas, Emma, and you reminded me of that." In that moment, Emma felt her world shift. The burdens she had carried for years seemed to lift piece by piece. Richard hadn't just given her help, he had restored her faith in life and humanity.